Welcome to the Reasons to Reason podcast. I'm your host and captain, Sal Galati. This is the show that's going to talk about all the things we're not supposed to: God, religion, and politics. So strap in, prepare to get offended, and maybe, just maybe, our nation can learn how to reason again. Thanks for joining us for another episode. I have a friend in today that agreed to talk to me, works for the Chicago Police Department. We're going to talk about a lot of things going on, particularly online, a lot of things going on with our youth, how they're being hurt, things that we can do as parents, as communities to protect them, things that are just going on in our culture, society, what's driving it, what's behind it. I met Trevor here 4 or 5 years ago, just chit-chatting in the parking lot while we're waiting to pick up our kids from school. And from there, we've developed a friendship. And I've enjoyed getting to know him, his family, and really appreciate what he does in his work. And I thought it'd be a valuable thing to bring him in so people could become aware of what's online and how we could protect our kids. He's going to talk a little bit about his faith journey and how he got into law enforcement in the first place. And I think it'll be an interesting conversation. So, hey, Trevor, thanks for coming in.
Hey, Sal, thanks for having me, and pretty excited to get this conversation going today.
Cool. So let me ask you a question, Trevor, to start you off. Tell me about your childhood influences, what you thought of the world, maybe why you went into law enforcement in the first place, and how that affected you, and then we'll kind of jump in at various times.
Yeah, so I grew up about 3.5 hours southwest of here in a little farming community, a real small town. I lived out in the country. The town I lived in, 750 people. Great place to grow up. One of those places, I loved everything about the place growing up, but I couldn't wait to get out of there, get to a bigger city, and now it's kind of come full circle. I can't wait to get back. We were members of the Lutheran church. Most of the church was composed of Swedish farmers. So I think I'm one of the few people, our family's one of the few people that didn't have the S-O-N at the end of their name. We had a lot of Johnsons, Swansons, Olsons. You know, like I said before, kind of had that itch to get out, get to a bigger city. Lucky enough to have a profession in mind at a younger age. I kind of knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to go into law enforcement. I had a sister who was 11 years older than me, and she had a boyfriend who was a county sheriff. And he became like a big brother to me, and getting to know him and getting to know what he did for his job, I found it pretty fascinating and kind of decided I want to go that route.
Cool. So then you have this background and then you go into law enforcement. We've kind of talked about how that had an impact on you. You know, questions a lot of people ask, what kind of God would allow some of the things that you've been exposed to? And I want to just say how grateful I am for guys like you. Like, I'm aware of this stuff, but I don't like looking at it or thinking about it. But you got to go in, you got to deal with it and see it, and it's got to affect you. And it has affected you, and then, there's a point in life where you start asking questions, and that's what I want to hear about from this point of the interview, and then we could kind of go into more details is what's going on in our culture, society, how do we fix it, what are solutions?
Yeah, so as a kid, I enjoyed going to church. I loved going to Sunday school. Getting out of college and starting my profession in law enforcement, kind of stepped away from the church a little bit from, what I was seeing every day at work with tragedy and death and violence and, a lot of good things happening or bad things happening to good people, and, started really questioning what is going on. Why would this is not fair, in a just world of God is just, God is good. Why does this keep happening over and over again? So it really questions your faith when you're seeing that in day-to-day activities.
We got to talking, and you mentioned one time, like, your son was asking you questions now. And that's the gut check, right? I'm just grateful I found my faith early on before my kids could ask me questions, and I have an answer for them because I never wanted to lie to my kids. I've mentioned in other episodes, like, I don't even lie to them about Santa Claus. But you want to be able to answer these questions, and, the Bible offers answers if you seek. So your son's asking you questions, and I think that kind of encouraged you to kind of get into it and understand, like the question you asked, why does a good God allow such bad things? And the reality of it is it's not his will that these things happen. It's because of us. And the point I've made to you before is, like, if everyone loved themselves as their neighbor, we wouldn't have any problems, but we can't. None of us can. And because of that, even on a small level, whether it's having a grievance with someone that took advantage of you, whatever. I mean, not every crime is a murder. We commit crime every day in our lives when we're not forgiving one another, when we're doing something against someone, and all these things bubble up and lead to all the sadness and misery and all the violence we see. That said, what's the biblical view? That if people were actually to change and be different, we could have this peaceful world, and that's what's promised at some point when he comes back. But talk to me about how your faith kind of got reignited.
Yeah, so you mentioned that my son started asking tough questions about the Bible. going back, I'm trying to think about how much I really knew at that point. There's questions answers I couldn't give him. And as a father, you're like, wow, I need to, for a father and for myself, I really need to get back into this because I want to be there for him. He's going down the right path. He's curious. I want to set him in the right direction so he can follow Christ as well. So I'm looking at it and I'm going back and I look at the stories that I remember as a kid from the Bible and from children's Bible books. And there was a time where, yeah, those are nice stories, maybe part of my head, and maybe I didn't believe that they were real. They were kind of, most of the kids' Bible books were kind of put out in vibrant pictures and stories to make it interesting for kids, but they seemed a little fake to me. And then going back into reading the Bible again and just really doing my own research and going to Bible study, you come to realize that, no, these are true. The prophecies are true. And if you follow history, you can back it up with history books. And that really got me going. And just that concrete evidence, doing more studying and being able to provide some answers to my son. And that's kind of where I'm at now, just still learning as we go.
I tell people all the time, these children's Bible books, a lot of them, I think they're from Satan. I mean, maybe you don't believe in Satan, but I will tell you that they're not truthful, and I think they're intentionally meant to make it seem like just a bunch of fairy tale stories. When you read the actual biblical account and then compare, like you said, to history, to the scientific record, you see like, oh, there's harmony here. Yeah. Are there things that are hard to believe? Of course, there's miracles. But I'd always point people to the fact that we're here. So some miracle happened. To deny any kind of miraculous activity, well, you deny the reality of our existence. If you are interested in those conversations with your kids, don't base it on some like Noah's Ark where the giraffe's head sticking out the left side and it's just silly stuff. And I tell people all the time, what I knew about Christianity prior to actually reading the Bible for myself came from Ned Flanders on The Simpsons. That's what I thought a Christian was. A dumb guy, gullible, stupid, believed whatever he was told, and that's not me. I think it's a good opportunity to kind of get into your work life now. Obviously, we're under a new administration. There's a lot of changes going on. Me as a citizen looking at it, most of the people I've met in law enforcement are always good, decent people, just want to execute the law, just want to keep the streets safe. They don't want to be political. They're not interested in politics from their work standpoint. But I always have this sense that like they're not allowed to do their jobs. And what are the missions of these various agencies, of these various police departments? And I want to hear it from your perspective sitting in there. Like, I think I sent you an article today, actually. So this is very recent. There was a young girl in Indiana that was, she got picked up because she was making some credible threats of committing a school shooting. It's nice to see when those things are thwarted. The tension is, and we'll talk about it, it's a lot of stuff to unpack, like what's the balance between people's rights and then really thwarting an attack. There's that movie Minority Report that was like predictive modeling of like when will people be a crime. That's a nightmare scenario. If anyone rubs someone the wrong way, they're going to be like, oh, he's about to commit a crime, let's put him in jail. We don't want that. But when it's credible threats of violence, instead of waiting for it to happen, how do we intervene? So I gave you a lot there to like unpack, but go for it.
General law enforcement, the mission, there's, protect and serve. You see that on a lot of police cars. We got the sanctity of life. So evolving profession. When I first started, it's a lot different than it is now. I've been doing this for 25 years. I felt like the mission was clearer when I first started. I feel like there's a lot of hurdles on our way now. We've been through the 2020 and the defund the police, and I think that's going to have some dire consequences for law enforcement, just for the fact that our recruitment efforts aren't where they need to be. A lot of people are not wanting to go into the profession. When I first started, I took a test and there was 25,000 people, taking the test with me. It was very competitive. Now we're having a hard time filling the seats to take this job. And a lot of people are leaving earlier. We've had guys that are, they would stay in law enforcement for 30, 35 years, and now they're 20 and out. They want to just go do something different. And good for them, but you're leaving a lot of knowledge on the table, because when you go to the academy, you learn the law, you learn the rules and regulations, but when you get on the street, you're really learning from a veteran. That's where the real nuts and bolts of law enforcement come from. And we're leaving a lot of that knowledge on the table because these guys are leaving early. They're not doing as much proactive police work anymore because they don't want to get in trouble. And who can blame them? They don't want to have their lives uprooted because they're out there trying to do the right thing.
Let me interject here real quick. I did that episode where we're talking about pastor in quotation marks, twisting God's word really for a political agenda. So like we've seen this defund the police and all that. And the people that were hurt most were the people that supposedly they were looking out for. All right. So when we look at underserved communities, those are the ones that got knocked by defunding the police. There's a lot of decent people there that are not criminals that want police around because there's a lot of violence around. So it's an example of like, I just get frustrated, I get angry when I see wolves in sheep's clothing pretending to protect people when really they're just trying to consolidate power for themselves. So I see that as a citizen, and that knowledge base, absolutely. What's being left behind? I went to go serve some pizzas with some police at a local precinct, and I was shocked at how young all these guys were, and there was no older guys, and they look like kids. A couple years of training, and they're in a car by themselves driving around. It's tragic. Just the things people don't think about that I'm trying to raise awareness about.
Yeah, it's we definitely have some hard times ahead of us to get those recruitment efforts back up and going and getting the right people in the job. This is a profession you don't want to just throw anyone in. They got to want to do it, not just because of a salary or benefits or a pension. I think to be a good police officer, you really got to have it in your heart that you want to go out there and serve the people of your community. To go off of what you're talking about the article we read about school shootings and different violence when it comes to minors and these younger kids, that's a lot what I do now. I do a lot of investigations that we call threat to life investigations. So that's workplace violence, school shootings, and we're seeing a lot more juveniles enter this realm of investigations. And when you're talking about First Amendment rights and privacy, it makes the investigations hard. And we're obviously the supporter of the Constitution and our rights. Most police officers will definitely agree that they love the Constitution. They love the rights that it provides. It makes the investigations tough because a lot of these investigations stem online. These kids are talking to other kids or adults who they don't know on different platforms that are encrypted, and they start to go down these rabbit holes of different ideologies that kind of are not safe for them.
So we were talking earlier before the show, just figuring out what we were going to discuss, and it all goes back to a strong nuclear family, which, again, I'll mention Satan because I believe that there's entities that are material, and he's one of them. Some of these things that you're describing to me, like adults posing as kids to kind of lure them into like really disturbing behaviors. What other explanation is that other than a demonic force? What person would want to do that to a child? The thing I was going to say, what's our bedrock protection against this is a strong nuclear family. Keeping an eye on your kids. Don't send your kid off into his room or her room being immersed in garbage for hours at end. They're so susceptible. We were talking about even watching violence, and my kids are still very sensitive to it. I'm trying to protect that sensitivity in the movies we watch. Obviously, I don't want to keep them ignorant of the violence that is out there, but a kid at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old shouldn't be so desensitized that they could watch a graphic movie and not even flinch. Because what does that say about, we talked about sanctity of life. What is that going to say about their view of what life is? All goes to the big picture. If we evolve from nothing, we're just a bunch of animals, I guess it's not that big of a deal. But if we're created in the image of God, we're to protect life. That was your mission. That's what you're trying to do. You have a whole department dedicated to it. Why? Is life really worth anything? Of course it is. But I don't know if our kids believe that. And I think that's what's leading to a lot of this disgusting behavior. So we got to start thinking about it. What's changed, right? Guns have always been around. We were talking about earlier how there used to be gun clubs in schools and there were no issues. At least there weren't. The mass shooting really has started with Columbine as like a thing. No one even could wrap their head around it. Now you hear about it, you feel sick, but like we're desensitized to these things happening. That's crazy. So what's changed? Culturally changed. I'd argue that turning our back on God, turning our back on a simple, basic understanding that we were made in the image of God, subsequently leads to kind of this thing. What do you think it is? What are things that people can look for to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, I think a lot of these kids are just lost, right? They don't have a faith system. Sometimes they don't have a good family system as well. And you try to think back of what has changed over the past 25, 30 years before a lot of these incidents start kicking off. And there's a number of things, right? I think taking God out of school is one of them. I went to a public school and we said the Lord's Prayer before every football game. I'm not saying that you have to push Christianity in the school, but just that faith-based background gives kids more of a purpose, more of a direction, some of those good morals and ethics that you want them to grow up with. And technology, right? So we didn't have the technology growing up that the kids do now. That's a huge one. One of the big precursors I see a lot with a juvenile investigate for this threat to life type investigation is a lot of times they'll come home from school, they'll go right in the room, grab an iPad, grab their computer, and they'll be online for hours and hours on end, hopping on different apps like Discord and WhatsApp and Signal, and they're all these encrypted apps. They have no idea who they're talking to. Even some of the games they play that are online where different users from anywhere can hop on and chat with them. It's just they immerse themselves in this technology.
What are the common things I see? Usually these kids, there's a broken family, one capacity or another. There's abuse. It's not like out of the blue. They often have seen some psychologists in their past. A lot of them are medicated. I mean, I don't know if that's okay to say. I feel like it's such an obvious thing, but we've talked on the show in other areas where maybe drugs are being pushed unnecessarily, and maybe it doesn't want to get out that use of these drugs long term without proper guidance could lead to these things happening. You mentioned how you said the Lord's Prayer in school, and I'm obviously not one to want to push any particular religion. We talked about the First Amendment, the state shall not establish religion. I'm about pushing truth. I think it's a fact that we must have come from something. And I think it's a religion to push in the schools that we came from nothing. And as I stated before, if it's true that we came from nothing, so be it. I have no problem. I want to know the truth. But if it's not true, it's a tragedy that we're teaching our kids this. Because it deteriorates the value of life, depression, anxiety, all these things that these kids are struggling with. And because the nuclear family's weak, because of, again, policies that put in place that don't support the family in this country, these issues are coming from there. That's the difference, right? The families are weaker. The faith is weaker. What other explanation do you have? I want to hear the expert on the other side that's telling me that they got this other explanation. That's it. And we want to deny that is a possible solution. Let's look at it. Let's consider it. Let's give some advice to parents. Your kid goes up in your room, you think it's fine. I think the biggest problem is a naiveness of how wicked it could be online, and that there are people that trying to convince kids to do terrible things to themselves even. You read these stories, and those are tragic because sometimes those are from, families that are pretty engaged with their kids. I think a lot of people would be like, I can't believe that happened to them, where a kid took a challenge and ended up committing suicide accidentally. Just let's talk about the reality of what's out there so people could be aware, what to look for, how to protect their kids from it, the conversations to have.
Yeah, I think first and foremost is chatting with your kids about the threats online. We help coach at a boxing program, and every session we do a child safety seminar, and we bring people in. We bring in state's attorneys and people from forensic nurses, and we talk about those threats. We have a course that we talk about online threats, because not everyone that you're talking to online is who they pose to be. Know what apps they have on their phone. I'm a strong believer in not letting my kids have phones. They're younger still a little bit, but we're having 9 and 10 and even 8-year-olds have phones. I think that's a little ridiculous. That's my personal opinion. I'm not, like I said, we're not judging anyone, but if they are going to have that technology, we as parents got to monitor who they're talking to. Look and see what apps they have. If they have the Discord or the WhatsApp or some of these encrypted apps, know who they're talking to. One of the things that kind of scares me is you got games that are maybe be innocent, like Roblox and these different online games where people can jump on. And that's where a lot of the predators are out there targeting kids. And they'll pose to be a 13-year-old talking to your child. And they will gain that trust as a friend. And then they'll have them do something, maybe send a picture. And then they'll maybe have them send something a little more risque, like a nude photo or a topless photo. Once they have your child, they have them, in a position where now they've sent something that they could be embarrassed about, and that's when the real trouble starts. They'll threaten to send the photo to their parents' work or to their school. Then they start having them do stuff. They'll say, "Hey, I need you to harm your pet. I need you to carve my name on your body somewhere." So that there's a lot of sick, what I believe, satanic stuff going out there online targeting your children, and we just got to be really aware of what's going on and what their activity is online.
So that's an example. I mean, where else does that come from? There was a movie called Usual Suspects, but the line at the end of the movie goes, "Greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing everyone he didn't exist." And I think that is. This is evil, wickedness. There's no explanation. You mentioned you were doing those clinics at the boxing club where we bring in state's attorney. I'm curious because that's what we have a lot in this episode, people doing really good things on their own. You get any federal funding for that? Is there a program that you just did that, right? How better use of resources to fund and promote stuff like that than the garbage they spend money on. And that's what it is, because no one's listening. So I'm not in law enforcement, I'm not in politics, but I'm in business. And what I found in business, and I think it applies to these institutions as well, the people in the field don't have a say on what's going on. And the people telling everyone what to do are so detached from the field. I'd argue like Hegseth. This guy Hegseth now that's going to run the Department of Defense, he's the guy that you need. You need a guy that knows what being a warrior is to run the warriors. But unfortunately, what happens in the corporate world, what happens in law enforcement, all these governmental institutions, like the people that run the CPD, I can speak frankly because I'm not a CPD. They're political people. They're not the best cops. The best cops should be going into those positions, but they can't get in those positions because they're honest, they have integrity, they won't just say what they have to say to get the gig. But guess who does that? Political people. Like a Fauci is a political creature. He's not the best scientist or the doctor in the world, but he knows how to get ahead. It's not a theory, it's a fact. You can't stay in a job that long as he did without being a political creature. I went on a little rant there. But wouldn't it be cool if decent people like you that are just trying to help could get some of these federal funds? I don't know how to figure it out, but I want people to start thinking about that.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to put some positivity in kids' lives, to have a purpose. When you take something positive away from them, it's filled with something else, right? And it's usually a negative. You look back, and we're seeing that we're having a lot of mental issues with children, and you look back, what was taken away from them? Well, their school, right? For 2 years, they couldn't show up to school. Their friends, right? Their social interactions. So a lot of the positives were taken away from these children. And when you, like I said, when you take a positive away, it's usually filled by something negative, and they run to that, the online platform. They run to that negativity. They run to the constant scrolling of entertainment, or, even worse, when they're just constantly scrolling, death images or, violence, and it just over and over and over again. They've taken something positive away, and they're replacing it with something negative.
And how these algorithms work, that they're designed like to suck you in. I mean, as an adult, I can sense when I'm being sucked into something, so I could pull out. Plus, I'm 40 and I lived a long life without all this stuff around me, right? So I have some gauge. What people don't get is like, so we're the adults in a room, right? We're in 40s, 50s, and we've all had we've had an experience before all this social media that we're a bit more grounded. Even us can get roped in. What I'm trying to convey to people is we don't know what it's like to be a kid that this has been their world their whole life. They don't have an alternative. They think this is it. And they have no gauge of like, whoa, I'm being sucked into this. I've been on here for 2 hours. My mind is being warped literally as I go. I watch some of these videos, even forget the content of the videos. The way they're filmed, the quick cutting in, cutting out, they're doing weird things with filters and stuff. I could sense it. I don't know exactly because I'm not that tech savvy, but I could feel it messing my head up. And that's what I just implore to people as their kids are on these various apps. And decent people, I'm not judging. Just be aware. They're completely designed to warp and change you. Again, I keep mentioning demonic. I can't prove that. But keep an eye on your kids and be careful with some of these apps, I guess, would be the takeaway.
So when we talk about these investigations, the best way for us to learn about something, like you always want to get in front of it, right? You want to be able to prevent that school shooting. And there is a lot that get thwarted out there. Law enforcement are not out there scrubbing these websites. They're not out there constantly in these chat rooms. A lot of them are, like I said, encrypted. So the best solution that we have is people reporting. You talk to your kids, you have those hard conversations. Hey, if you see something online or you hear something at school, little Johnny's talking about, bringing a gun to school. Like, they need to tell a teacher, they need to tell you. They see something online that doesn't look right, they need to come talk to you about that. And you just got to have that relationship with your children. So they, there's that trust there where they say, hey, this doesn't seem right. They may be looking at something totally innocent and they're fine doing some research, or, maybe just watching some fun videos, or they're in a chat room and they hear something. They need to be able to have that trust to come to you. And that's where we get most of our information, where we can thwart some of these attacks.
Yeah, and I think that's what happened with the case in Indiana, which it's a relief to see when those things work. You talked about the void. Why are these kids seeking? This is what's so sick about people that groom children. Kids want to be affirmed by an adult. And when they're not getting it from their parents, per se, and look, there's a lot of the situations, right? People die or pick up a drug addiction. I know not every family is wrapped up perfectly, but that's where the community comes in, and be those positive adult models in their life, so they don't seek some guy online or some girl online that's going to twist them up. That reminds me, you actually mentioned one group in particular. So like we mentioned how Satan is involved in these things and they're demonic. All right, you don't want to believe in Satan. Tell me about this group.
Well, we have a group that's really sick and twisted out there. They keep changing their name, but they're known as 764 or the Order of Nine Angles. They're classified as a terror network by the U.S. Department of Justice, and they claim the stuff that they're pushing out there. It's kind of like a Satanist terror network. And they're everywhere. They're in all your kids' apps. They're in all the different chat rooms, and they're trying to gain the trust of your children to reel them in, to get them to do something embarrassing, and then they got them, right? And then they're going to start to extort them and to do horrible things. So those are a couple of groups. If you want to do some research out there, you can take a look at the 764, the Order of Nine Angles for yourself.
So there it is. There's an example. Whether you believe it or not, they certainly believe in it, and their goal is to harm kids. Jesus had a line, actually, when he was talking about the little children. For anyone that wants to hurt one of these little ones, he'd be better off if they tied a millstone around his neck and threw him in the sea. Justice will come. But while we're on this earth, let's try to protect our little ones. I don't think there's any more noble cause than that. So, Trevor, thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk soon. Thanks for joining us for another episode. I hope I got you thinking and out of your comfort zone. Believe me, the biggest fear your government has is a population that is thinking and talking to one another. So get out there, take a risk, start a conversation, make a friend, and reason with each other. Share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. I wish you peace and love.